Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today we're going to make a sweet little cane called the double dash cane, and we're going to use that to make up into cuff bracelets. I'll show you everything you need to know to make the cane to start with, and then how to put it round the cuffs. So I'm going to add some little crystal inserts as well, just in case you want to do that. And this is how the cane comes out if you just want to layer up individual slices of the cane to make another project instead. So let's start by taking you through the equipment you need for today's project. The equipment you need for this project is fairly standard. So a polymer clay blade, I sometimes refer to these as tissue blades. A little craft knife always comes in handy. A small roller. A small tool just to smooth between any gaps between our slices of clay. I just like to use the small cable needles, but anything along those lines works really well. If you want to add any little additions in, I'm just adding crystals in. These are the ones which have got the triangular shaped backs with the points in, so you can set them into the clay, but of course you can always just add stick-on ones afterwards. A small long sheet, long enough to go round the whole of your wrist, of wax, greaseproof or tracing paper. I'm actually using wax paper today. I'm going to use a measuring sheet to work on. This is the one I normally use and is freely available from www.printablepaper.net, and I've simply laminated it so I can use it multiple times. And then onto the cuff kits themselves. So I'm very lucky because I've actually been given 2 sets of the cuff kits, and they come in various sizes with various different bands and the strips to work with them, and I will show you how they work as we go along. I've been given one set from Shelley Wiley of PC UK Tools, who sells the clay cuff kit, and another one by Teresa Salgado, who does them with easy cuffs, and she does them in both standard and long sizes, and that's for Tiny Pandora. Now, you know me, I'm all about, if you can, using stuff you've got around the household. So while these kits are amazing, and if you want to do more than one cuff, then once you start to get into the hang of it, then I really can recommend buying these. To start out with, you can simply cut yourself a template from an ordinary sheet of paper, the right width and the length you need to use, and find yourself something like an empty jam jar with nice straight sides, or a used drinks can works quite well for size wise as well, and simply use those in place of where I'm using the cuff kit. As I say, completely up to you. Don't go and spend any money if it's something you're not sure about, but once you get into them and if you decide you do want to do them, then as I say, I can thoroughly recommend the kits. The only other things you're going to need are a tile to work on, aluminium foil to tench your piece in when we bake it, always do that to protect the clay, and as normal I will be using a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use, and just some tissues or wet wipes just to clean my hands and my tools as I go along as required. So that's all we need in the way of equipment, so let's now move on to the clay. For today's session I'm using Fimo Soft, but any known brand of polymer clay will work very well for this technique. It's a very simple cane, so they'll all work well. To start with, I'm going to be using the plum coloured polymer clay. This is half one of the small packs, so 1 ounce or 28 grams in size. We're using most of this. It will also be the underneath and the inside of our cuff. Then I'm going to do 2 Skinner blends with these 2 colours and these 2. So we've got lavender and white, peppermint and white, and the lavender and white we've actually got 1/4 ounce or 7 grams of each of those, and for the peppermint and white we've got slightly more, so you see these are 3 as opposed to 2 bars, so this is approximately 1/3 of an ounce or 10 grams of these. And the first thing to do is to get all of these clays conditioned in their separate colours in the amounts that they are at the moment. If you're unsure about conditioning polymer clay, which basically just means getting it ready to move and easier to manipulate, I do have a video on some quick tips and information on conditioning polymer clay, and I will put the link to that in the details below this video if that's of any help to you. So that's it. So it's very quick and easy, this one, so let's start and move on to the double dash cane. So I've conditioned all of my clays on setting number 2 of my pasta machine, so really quite thick. And on my pasta machine, setting 0 is my thickest and 9 is my thinnest. So the plum colour then gets put to one side for later. And what I'm planning to do is to do a Skinner blend with these two blends. So Skinner blend with the blue and the white, Skinner blend with the lavender and the white. And so I've conditioned all the clay so it's nice and soft and ready to go. And all I'm going to do is put a diagonal line down across these and then turn them up, match the triangles up, put them back together so that all of one colour is on one side and all of one colour is on the other side. Doesn't matter that they're not particularly neat rectangles, just something roughly the shape. And then for each one I'm going to fold them top to bottom and put them back through the pasta machine, constantly putting fold through first, and I will keep putting that through until we get a nice blend from the white all across to the peppermint, and then separately from the lavender all across to the white. If you're unsure about doing Skinner blends, I do have a tutorial on that which shows you how to get them a nice shape and a few tips and techniques, and I will put a link to that tutorial below in the details below this video. So I will bring you back when I've got that done, and it's still on setting number 2 that I'm going to put my Skinner blends through. So here are the 2 blends completed, and all I need to do now, I'm going to fold them in half. And this one, because it's slightly wider, I'm going to fold that in 3. Press down carefully down the folds to make sure I've got no trapped air. And then each one separately is going to be put through the pasta machine, firstly on setting number 2, blue end first to give me a longer strip, then the same with this one, and then I'm going to put my pasta machine down to my thinnest usable setting, which on my machine is setting number 9. And again, blue end first, I'm going to end up with a nice long strip of the blue and white and a nice long strip of the lavender and white, and I will bring you back when I've done that. And both of these blends we are going to concertina, and by that I simply mean take one end, doesn't matter which, and start folding it backwards and forwards on itself. This larger blend we're going to go backwards and forwards till it's about 3/4 of an inch, about 2 centimetres wide. Once you've done that, you want to just neaten it up slightly because it tends to go skew-if, and we want this more of a rectangular shape. So I'm going to press it flat, the white side and the blue side, and then I'm going to press it down onto the tile to neaten it off till I've got a nice sort of rectangular shape. Something a bit like that. Put that to one side, and now we're going to do exactly the same with this one, except this one's going to be a narrower concertina. So this one's probably about 1/2 inch, probably about just over 1 centimetre wide. And this one, we're just going to press around the sides just to make it slightly more circular in shape. Once we've done that, we'll give it a roll. And I'm going to reduce this roll down in size to make it slightly smaller because I want it to sit inside a groove that goes inside that. The bigger you make this, the stronger this colour will come through. The smaller you make this, the stronger this colour will appear in the finished design. So bear that in mind as well when you're working. So I don't need a lot smaller, just a bit. Something a bit like that. So I'm going to neaten off that end. Cut it so it's roughly the right length. Put that bit to one side, you can use that for something else later. Take a little bit of your darker outside plum colour, put this through on a thin setting, so I'm going to use setting number 7 on my machine. And I just want a piece big enough to wrap this in. So I'm going to neaten off one end, neaten off top and bottom, and then just wrap this once around that circle. So now with our cane, which is roughly the same size as the round cane I've created, we're just going to press down on the light coloured side of our oblong, and then we're going to inset this cane so it's the dark side down. So we've got light side of the blue one, dark side of the lavender. Make sure it's the same on the other side, it hasn't twisted. And now all we're going to do is we're going to pinch along the top to make this into more of a triangular shape. So I find it easier to do flat on the tile. And having done one side, you can turn it over until you've got a nice triangular shape. Take a little more of your dark colour, take a piece that's the same length as your triangular cane and put this through that way on a thinner setting, so a medium sort of setting. I'm going to do setting number 5 on my pasta machine. Chop one end off neatly, and we're going to wrap halfway round the cane with this colour. Now the thickness you use for this colour depends how much you see those dashes in the finished technique. So if you don't want this one to be very obvious, then use a thinner sheet of clay. If you want it to be really obvious, then use a nice thick sheet. But it starts from the top of our triangle, goes down one side, and then only halfway down the middle of the cane. So just chop your excess off there. And that's it. That is our cane effectively made, and what we're going to do now is we're just going to manipulate this to get that nice pattern. So the first thing we're going to do is to continue to reduce this, and by that I'm simply pressing in whilst pulling it slightly longer, and we're going to do this till this is about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres in length. Just roughly, doesn't have to be exact. This is where the measuring sheet comes in handy. Put it on the sheet and then cut neatly down through the middle. And then we are going to put our canes together in such a way that one piece is actually going to be upside down. And you're going to put both the dark colours together. So it's creating a nice dark sheet in the middle, and you're going to have half on one side and half on the other. So it's almost like creating a Z effect, with this bit facing this way and this bit facing this way. And if you've got that Z, then you're on the right lines for doing this cane. So it's quite diamond shape at the moment. We want to make that more square. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to press in along these pointed sides, pushing them in towards the middle to make more of a square shape. And once I've got it as a square, I can then, on my tile, start manipulating it as a square shape. And again, all we're going to do is keep this square. If you want a really nice even effect in your finished cane, then keeping all of your canes even sort of along here as you go, and making each side the same, making sure they are square, will give you a really nice finished effect. Again, we're going to go till it's about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres in length. If you notice, at times I just pull my hands tight along the cane, and that's simply to even out any pressings down that I've put in with my fingers. When you've got it roughly, and I say it is only roughly the right length, again chop down in the middle, and this time you want to put it together so that you've got a triangle going here, but it's meeting up with the dash in the middle. So effectively your Z's are now going that way and in reverse going out. So I'm showing you how to put it together the way to create the effect that we're doing, but obviously putting it together in a different formation will simply just give you a different final effect. So experiment. Don't think of it as going wrong if yours doesn't come out the same way as mine. It's just you've created another example of how to do it. So we've now got a square cane, but you know me, we're going to change this. So we're now going to change this into a triangular shape. So this is going to be our point, and this is going to be our flat. So turn it on its side, and with your fingers just work on these 2 outer corners to start with. Just press them flatter, pressing down towards the bottom. Go backwards and forwards, pressing them down until you're at a point where you can create a point with this colour along the top. Okay, something a bit like that. Now you will have become distorted at either end, that's absolutely fine. So what we're going to do, we're going to even that out. So where this part's narrower and this part's longer, simply pull this part till it evens out. We're going to sit it on one side, because what we're looking to do is to get a right angled triangle, and there's our right angle. So the easiest way to do that is to simply sit it on one side flat, and then you know the other side's going straight up towards you. And just keep playing with that until again it's about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres in length. And I am making sure as I go that I'm keeping it relatively even. I'll make sure that the width across here, this end, is roughly the same as the width across that end. And then when you chop down through, you will have the design, and that is what we're looking for. That's the pattern we're going for. We've got this double dash sort of going out into the middle of that Skinner blend. Make sure you've matched it up nicely at either end. Obviously this end is very distorted, don't worry about that. And all we're going to do now is reduce this down to the size that we need. These cuffs come in kit forms, and you need to decide on what size, on what width you're going to do. Now I'm going to do this width, which happens to be 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres. I've also done a couple of samples for you on this larger one, which is just over, so it's 1.1, so 1.25 inches. So what we need to do is we need to make our cane half the width of this cuff, which is why I'm going to use for this tutorial the 1 inch one, because obviously for that I just need to make it half an inch. You also want to have a look at the size or the length of your piece, and this one I know from example happens to be 6 inches in length, so I know I need my piece, my finished piece, to be 1 of these squares wide by 6 of those squares long. And if you take down to the half inch, each one of those is going to have 4 squares, so I'm going to go 4, 8, 12, all the way up to 24 squares. So I need to get this to the right size, and then I simply cut off 24 squares. So as before, I'm simply going to reduce down by pressing in whilst pushing it slightly longer. And I will carry on doing that until I've got it roughly the right size, and then show you a few tips just to make it really neat for when you're putting your pieces together. When you've got it roughly down to the size you want, I'm just going to chop off the distorted ends because they have a tendency to become more bulbous. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down each of the corners and really pinch them tight with my thumb and finger, so I've got a nice sharp point on each side, and that makes all the difference when you start to put your slices together. And now I'm going to take my roller and I'm going to roll flat, because obviously where I've pinched up I've distorted it slightly. But you should now have a much more square cane with nice pointed sides. Just go back and check that it's the right size. And when you're happy, we're going to take off any distorted end, and you're going to cut 24 slices. Now, the normal practice when you're cutting a square cane would be to slice, rotate to save it distorting too much. We will get some distortion, but because this piece is quite small, as long as your blade is nice and sharp, it won't distort too much. And when you're kaleidoscoping, it's actually easier to cut the slices and leave them in the same orientation, so that when you put them together, you can see exactly where you need to go. So I'm going to cut slices, and I'm just going to keep going down until I've got all 24. Okay, so I will keep going until I've got them all done. It's far more important to be consistent than to be thin or thick, so whatever size is comfortable for you to cut, just cut these slices in that size. Now I have cut 24 slices there, and as you can see I've got a lot of cane left, so this would certainly give me enough to do 3 different cuffs and also play around and make other things as well. So having got our slices ready, I'm going to find the leftover part of my plum clay, and because my slices are relatively thin, so probably about a couple of millimetres thick, I'm going to put this through on a nice thick setting of my pasta machine, so something setting number 2. So I'm going to put it through a few times first just to make sure it's back to being nicely conditioned. And because we know already, particularly particularly with our measuring thing, or with your paper template, whichever you're planning on using, and we know that that's going to fit on our measuring sheet. All I've got to do is fold this so it's larger than I need it to be, put it back through the pasta machine with the folds at the sides so any air that gets trapped gets pushed out, and I should end up with a nice long sheet. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I've got plenty, so starting there, actually go up to 7. And now I know where my piece is going to go, and I've got my templates I can use to make them nice and neat at the end. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull away 2 at a time. So the first one goes that way, that one goes that way, and then I know automatically that they are going to fit together like that. Match them up as perfectly as you can and sit them down towards one end of your bangle, of your cuff. Same again, pull them out, but this time we know we need to turn them that way up. So now when I put them down, put those 2 together and they will marry up perfectly with the ones below. Now, one of the things you need to look for almost straight away, if you can, is a tell, something that's going to be the thing in your cane which is different from one place to another, so that should you drop a piece, you'll be able to see exactly how it fits together. So mine would be, can you see on this particular one, there's a little right angle where it goes up and out. So that is my tell. So if I drop one of these pieces, I know how to get it back together by putting it like that. And all we need to do now is put that piece on there and then continue working our way up, putting all 24 pieces on in pairs of 2 the whole way up. And I'll bring you back when I've got that done. So there we are, there's our finished pieces, all nicely completed. But you will find, even though we had those nice points, they should have all fitted together nicely in the middle. You will often find slight gapping towards the outside, and this is where I use just the side of the cable needle. So before I put any paper over it or do anything else, I will by hand just go over and just pull any gaps together and just do any manipulation that's needed. Once you're happy, that's all done. Take your sheet of greaseproof, baking parchment, wax paper, place that over the top, and then with a roller, roll across top to bottom and vice versa. So what I'm trying to make is as nice and flat as possible. And then I will usually do a little diagonal roll as well, because if we can get this as neat as possible so we don't need to do any sanding, that would be amazing. Have a feel with your finger just to make sure it's all nice and even, and when it is, take away the paper. Take your template and place it over the top. Again, this is where these Perspex ones are quite handy, because obviously you can see through them as opposed to the paper ones. And what you'll find has normally happened is that your piece has become distorted down the edges, so it's slightly wider and not as neat as you would like it. Now, of course, you can just chop this off and use this as a ruler, but I want all the pattern to stay on. So what I'm doing is I'm putting it as central as I possibly can, just pressing down to make sure it's nicely sticking to the clay. And then with the blunt end of my tissue blade, making sure I'm keeping my fingers well away from the sharp end, I am very simply going to go up to the edge of my cane and just press it up and in to the template. So I'm not doing it with the bottom colour here with this plum, just with this pattern bit. and that way you can neaten off and get all your pattern in. And then the whole blade, again obviously making sure you do not cut yourself, gives you a nice neat edge. Repeat for the other side. And when you've got both sides neat, then with the actual sharp side of the blade, using the point, simply cut away the excess clay on either side. Because I'm working on a measuring sheet, I can actually lift up and peel this off so it doesn't stick. And then I'm going to do the same, press in and neaten off either end. And then carefully remove all the clay from the measuring sheet. So there is our finished piece of clay. What you will find is that this is of course the 6 inches that we measured. However, going around the outside of the bangle, we do need it to be slightly wider. So very gently, just stretch it just a fraction as you go along. Place it to one end. Hold it in place, but don't press down hard to start with. Just see how much, so I need to stretch it just a fraction more. So I'm actually just pulling really along the centre bit. And then put it onto the cuff so you can feel that it's nice and even all the way around. If you stretch it too much, then simply get your piece and just push it together slightly. It's amazing how malleable polymer clay is. You can move it in either direction. And just stretch it ever so slightly wider if it's not quite as wide as you want it to be. And where these corners are rounded off, you could of course cut them off, but because it's just such a small amount, when I'm using these cuff blanks, I just press in the corners to make the corners rounded. And that way, again, you're not losing any of your pattern. Check when you go over if you can get a nice clean roller, and keeping all of your fingers well inside the blank, you can just roll over the top. Make sure you've got no marks. And just make it as neat as you want. So you can leave it exactly like that, or if you want to put some little crystals in, particularly if in the centre of your pieces you haven't got them matching up exactly, then putting a crystal in gives a nice little sort of hides any problem areas. Decide what colour you want to go there where. So I'm going with these blue ones and the Diamante, and I am going to put, I think, blue in the middle of this one. So with my cable needle I've simply just made a little indent. When your indent's there, you can just pop him in, and then the next one will be diamond coloured, and I'll simply work my way along. So there we go, I've put all the little crystals in there and I've pushed them in quite deep. If I was going to sand and polish this afterwards, then I'd ping them all out before I sanded and polished. If I'm not going to sand and polish, I would probably still see if I could ping them out. I have pressed them in very deep because we had a nice thick layer of clay here. But you should be able to get a little needle in or a pin and pop them out and then just simply glue them back in after baking. But of course you bake them in because we bake at such a low temperature. They are absolutely fine inside. So I simply put that flat on a tile to bake, tent the whole piece in aluminium foil to protect the clay should the oven spike, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And I'm going to push that slightly to one side because I'm going to bake 2 at once. Here's another version I did earlier. So this one's with the wider cane. So I'll show you the one we've just done. So that's the size we just did, and you can see this one was significantly larger because it was going around the larger cuff blank. As before, just need to pull it ever so slightly longer, and then with the larger blank I will do exactly the same and put him round. And this one I probably won't put any crystals on because I'm going to leave that exactly as it is because I think the pattern in that one's come out particularly well. So I'll get that one on, get him nicely finished and bake them both and bring you back when I am done. So once your piece is out of the oven and cooled, or if you're impatient, you could cool it off in a bowl of cold water. Just very carefully remove the shape from the form. It should just ping off really easily. And there effectively is your cuff bracelet finished. All you need to do is actually put it on to see how it looks. As I said, I'm not going to sand this one. I like the finish on this one as it is. I might just do a tiny little bit just around any sort of rough edges, just on the corners, just to sort of soften it off. And I will also, as I said, just ping out the little crystals and glue them back in. If you did want to sand, then you need to use the wet dry sanding paper, and I will tend to go for 240 grit, 600, 1000, 1500 and 2000 grit, and I'll do that in a bowl of water with a little bit of detergent in there just to help keep any pieces in the water. And I will always protect my hands. In my case I'll wear rubber gloves, but just protect your hands with something that is good for you to make sure you don't cut or rub your fingers raw with any sandpaper. And if you do sand, which I have done with the red one, this is how it will come out. So that's been sanded and then finished on a polishing wheel to give it a really nice finish, and again just slips on and looks like a lovely cuff bracelet. So here are another few options of colourways. This one I used the brilliant blue and white, and then the raspberry and white, and then the outline colour was done with a deep plum, and I kept it quite thin so the dashes weren't quite as visible on this one. This one was done with the ruby red and white, and then sunflower yellow and white, and the outer level was done with the royal violet. And on this one I stayed very much with the green feel, so we had emerald green and white, apple green and white with a black outline. And although this one was also quite a thin outline, because it was in black, those dashes do still show up quite brightly. So there's some other colour combinations for you, and as you see, these ones are the wider one, that one's a thin one. This one isn't finished off quite so nicely because this was just my trial one, but I thought I'd just show you the colour combination of that one as well. So there we go, that's the end of the tutorial, and that was the double dash cane made into a cuff bracelet. I hope you enjoyed that one. The cane's quite easy, and don't forget, you'll just end up, if you put yours together slightly differently, with an alternate finished look, which I'm sure will look amazing as well. As always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. That's it for now. That's that one finished. I hope to see you next time. Bye for now. Bye.